what the forward type is telling you, what the reverse type is telling you. Okay. So like I mentioned before, the 4 different discrepancies are missing or extra in your cells or forward typing, and then missing or extra in your reverse or plasma. So for your ABO type, you can just use the ABO lab manual for your directions, since I have this PowerPoint up. Keep those boxes, and we'll fill it up with one of the filled full boxes. So we don't have good like storage things, so we'll just borrow from another box. And the ABO discrepancy homework that you guys did, it's kind of to get you thinking about what's happening, because it's kind of reverse of what you'll actually see. Normally you'll get the reaction and you have to make a call of what's going on. I think everyone's turned that in already.
Spin it again. Okay, just solutions one out.
Yeah, that's fine.
But we already have.
Okay, first discrepancy. So the first thing you want to think about is, what is the problem? So that is there an extra reaction or is there a missing reaction? And the other thing you want to keep in mind whenever you're looking at ABO discrepancies, you're assuming the stronger reaction is the correct reaction. So your anti-A is the strongest reaction. So you think this is probably an A. But the discrepancy is that we have a weak reaction with our B cells. So what are the causes for weak reverse reactions? So this is a problem with the patient's antibodies. It seems like they're not making enough antibodies if you're getting a weak reaction. Yes, so we can see that in immunocompromised patients or in older patients. So it's perfectly normal if you have a 96-year-old to have weak reverse. It's still called a ABO discrepancy, but we can be pretty sure it's due to the age. So that's why looking at the patient demographics is very helpful. Looking at the diagnosis, looking at the age, looking at pregnancy status. So how you would resolve this, does anyone know?
Well, compromise, you want to look at history or whatever the demographics is, and normal.
You would still, so if it's like an older patient or immunocompromised, because you have a weak reaction. So you would incubate for longer, either incubate for 15 minutes at room temperature or incubate for 15 minutes at 4 degrees, because your antibodies are IgM, so they're going to be cold loving antibodies, so they're going to react stronger at 4 degrees. So you incubate. So that's when you would record on your ABO worksheet, whatever you did. So 15 minutes at 4 degrees. So ABO discrepancy worksheets are normally to have longer sections. So if the original type looks weird, it'll have immediate spin, or that does not feel room temp. 15 minutes, or 4 degrees, 15 minutes. So if you incubate at 15 minutes room temp and it goes up to 2+, you could keep going, incubate for 15 minutes at 4 degrees. That might bring it up to 3+. It's not like we really want to go crazy on this because you have a cause for the discrepancy. But usually the first time you see a patient, you want to do as much as you can on the investigation to make sure you're confident in whatever you're saying. So second discrepancy. Do we have an extra or missing reaction in the forward or reverse? Yes. So what can cause extra reactions in the forward? So again, you want to go with your stronger reactions. So 0 and 4+ are pretty strong reactions. So you think, according to the reverse, this looks like an A patient. So what could be causing this extra reaction with anti-B?
It's an acquired Z caused by gram-negative bacilli, like within the gut.
Yes, thank you. This is a very common board exam. Acquired B. What's the resolution? Well, the cause, you're going to look at the diagnosis. If it's any kind of colon cancer or any kind of intestinal bacteria, it's going to resolve once the infection is cleared. So there's really nothing you can do about it while it's happening. But you can say, you would write this up. But again, this is not something we would see in current day. This is always a board exam question, but because we use monoclonal antibodies now, we don't really detect this. So if this happened current day, you would likely not have a reaction with anti-B. This isn't really a problem anymore at all, but you need to know it for board exam. Because back in the day, we would use polyclonal, and polyclonal will have some unspecific reactions. So you would pick this up when you're using polyclonal reagents. Next one. So extra or missing. And this is a picture of what, if you do an ABO on a slide, I don't know if you've ever done this like in high school, or if you go to donate, sometimes they'll do a slide type. They just put a drop of your blood on a slide. It's like a quick and dirty ABO. If you buy like ABO kits on like Amazon, usually it's done like this. So you just put a drop of blood on a slide, put a drop of antisera, and then you take a stick and mix it together. And then if it agglutinates, that's positive. And then if it doesn't agglutinate, it's negative. So extra or missing? Okay, so we have an extra reaction, but also have a weak reaction with our anti-A. So,
Strong reaction.
right. So we have strong anti-B antibodies and weak anti-A1 antibodies. So when we have a weaker reaction with anti-A, we're thinking it's probably a subgroup of A. So subgroups of A's can make antibodies to A1. Some subgroups make A1 antibodies, some subgroups do not. And it doesn't mean if you're A2, so 20% of A people are A2. All A2s do not make anti-A's, but some A2s do. So if you have an anti-A1, it's normal for A2 phenotypes to have it or not to have it. So that's in the ABO discrepancy homework. That's why plus or minus was a answer. So for example, an A2 It could be plus or minus. It's common both ways. They may or may not. Okay, so when we have A subgroups, the extra things we have in our rec that we can use to help us is we have A2 cells, because since A2 is so common, 20%, it's pretty common. You can test their plasma with A2 cells and see if they have an A2 antibody. So if they're just a normal A2 phenotype, they should not have antibody to A2. So they might have a 1+ to A1 cells, but a 0 with A2. And then we also have anti-A1 lectin, which may or may not be in your reagent rack now. So that is, so I don't know if you guys have seen anything about lectins yet. Lectins are basically antisera made from like seeds. And it's kind of weird because it's like, how did people know? Like, did they just test a bunch of seed, milk, water with a bunch of cells and see what happened? Because we have a lot of different lectins that we know about. So it's kind of cool. But anyway, A1 lectin will react with A1 phenotypes, but it will not react with A2 phenotypes. So that is how you can confirm that this would be an A2 subgroup with an anti-A1. And when you have an A2 subgroup, you want to report if they do have anti-A1, because it can go either way. But A2 subgroups, you don't want to give them A blood, even though they are A, because they can make anti-A1. So you give A2 subgroups O blood. I see you're thinking about it.
You said A2 can actually take.
This is an A2 that has made an anti-A1. So that's why you don't want to give A red blood cells if they need a transfusion, because they have an antibody to A1. So most or 80% of A's are A1. So if you give an A2 and A1 and they have an antibody, they're going to start attacking those cells. So they're not going to have a good transfusion. Okay, next one, extra or missing.
I guess missing. Can you get the missing or you get the extra?
So
Oh,
if you're looking at the forward, it looks like an O. You're looking at the back, what does it look like?
Okay.
Yeah. So you're missing a reaction with your A1 cells. So a good thing to do, you're thinking this might be a subgroup at this point. Anti-A, B is an antisera that should be in your rack. So the thing you need to know about ABO antisera, anti-A and anti-B are IgM. That's why we can do immediate spin testing for IgM. IgM are pentamer. You're familiar with what those look like, IgM? So they're so big, and because they have 5 basically antibodies put together, they can agglutinate on their own. They don't need the anti-IgG to cross-link. They can cross-link all by themselves. So that's why you can see positive reactions and immediate spin. Because your anti-A and your anti-B are IgM antibodies. But O blood groups also make an IgG that is anti-A, B. It can react with both A or B antigens. And that is important when you get into O mothers, because if they have A or B fetus, IgG can cross the placenta, IgM cannot because it's too big. But that anti-A comma B can cross the placenta and start attacking the baby's cells. But usually ABO, hemolytic disease of the newborn, is very mild and it doesn't really cause the baby much distress. So that is when you see babies that need to be under the bilirubin lamp. They're under the lamp and then it goes away. It's nothing long-term. They just have a little bit of jaundice. So anyway, what we would do with this one, because we want to see if it's a subgroup, is we would test with anti-A comma B. And usually if it's a subgroup, an A or B subgroup, the A comma B is a little bit stronger and it would show a reaction. So we have a reaction. It's most likely a weak A, and we think it's an A because they do have anti-B. So we don't think it's a B subgroup. We think it's an A subgroup.
I have a question. If you look at that, like, why couldn't it be O?
Well, anti-A comma B would not react with an O.
I don't know, I mean, like, if you were looking at that, just like that previous slide. Like,
Because it wouldn't be normal to make only anti-A or only anti-B. If it's an O, they should make them in pretty comparable numbers. Unless there's some subgroup going on. So AX is a subgroup that will react very weakly. Sometimes it'll react with anti-A comma B, sometimes it will not. Some of the very, very weak subgroups, you have to absorb and elute to actually get reactions. But a really easy thing to do to resolve ABO discrepancies is genotype the patient. But a lot of hospitals don't want to pay for genotyping. So that's, yeah. Sometimes you just have to use what you have. Okay. Next one. Missing or extra reaction. So again, when you're doing these, good thing for you to do while you're getting the hang of ABOs is look at the forward and say, what does the forward type tell me? And then look at the reverse, like look at them separately. So the reverse type looks like yeah. And then the forward, it looks like a B2, but you have mixed field. So remember what I told you earlier today. What does mixed field tell you? You have two cell populations. Two cell populations. That can be caused by different things. It can be caused by transfusion. It can be caused by a chimera. It can be caused by stem cell transplants. If you're converting, if I'm an A and then I get an O transplant, I could have two different cell types floating around at the same time. Chimeras are when there are two embryos and they merge together and you can have different stem cells in one person. So that happens. It's very rare, but it does happen. And it can also be caused from a traumatic delivery. A mother could have fetus blood circulating in her blood, so she could have her type and the baby's type floating around. So lots of different reasons for mixed field. The other thing you do want to remember for board exam, the three subgroups, A3 and B3, are mixed field. So in this case, it looks like it's a B3. If you look at transfusion history, there's no transfusion history. then you're thinking this is a B3 subgroup. But just remember, 3 goes with mixed field. No, 3 are the only mixed field reactions in subgroups. If you see mixed field, you're thinking 3. So the only way to resolve this would be with genotyping. There's nothing else you can do serologically to prove that this is at B3 until you genotype. Okay. Now, do we have extra or missing? Look at your strongest reactions. So now when you have extra reactions like this, there's a few different causes. So what you want to do is you want to run a screen and auto control. So you want to, let me see. So in one patient, we run the screen and the auto control. The screen cells are positive and the auto control is negative. So it looks like they have a cold allo antibody. In the second patient, we run the screen and the auto control and both are positive. So it looks like we have a cold auto antibody. So when you're looking at antibodies to determine if it's an allo antibody or an auto, you want to look at your auto control. Remember, you're testing your patient's plasma against your patient's red cells. If they're reacting, they have an auto antibody. Auto antibodies don't rule out that there are allo antibodies present. You can have both, which is a big pain in the butt. This will be on many exams. So make sure you're clear on what the auto control is telling you. So it's also important you know that the A and B reagent cells are pooled as opposed to screen cells. For screen cells, each vial has one donor in it. So you know exactly what the phenotype is. It's on the anagram. For the A1 cells and the B cells, it's a bunch of different A1 donors and a bunch of different B donors pooled together. So if you do have a cold allo antibody, like anti-M, you're going to get positive reactions like this, because there are some donors in there that are positive for M. So does anyone know how you would resolve that? Because if they have an anti-M, you can't test with the reagent cells.
You can warm it up.
You could pre-warm and see. But, so cold antibodies are typically IgM. So if you warm it up and it doesn't go away, what you can do is you can take a donor unit that is labeled A1 and a donor unit that is labeled B, phenotype those donors for M. If you have done an antibody workup and determined it is an anti-M causing this discrepancy, phenotype some donors, you find a B donor that's M negative and an A donor that's M negative. And you're basically treating those donor cells as your reagent cells. So you can prove that this AB patient does not have A1 antibody or B antibody. Does that make sense? That was a lot.
That's something that was like done at one blood or something.
At Life South, yes, or One Blood. Yes, that's what they do. They send off to a reference lab, which reference labs are normally at blood centers. Yes, although they don't have to. This is something that a hospital could do on their own. It's really about who you have and if they know what they're doing. Because they should have A and B donors on their shelves at all times, and they should have anti-M antisera that they can type those donors for, prove they're negative, and then use them. But if they don't have a SOP for that procedure, then yeah, they would send it out. Most hospital labs will send out ABO discrepancies. Unless you're like Shan. Shan's pretty much does everything on their own. Except platelet stuff. Okay, next one. What is going on here? Missing or extra? Yes. So at this point, we have no idea what's going on. So what I would do at this point, one thing, I would redo everything. Like, did I add reagent to all my tubes? Was it, did I mess up? Make sure I add antisera to my tubes and plasma to my tubes. And then if I'm still getting this reaction, I'm going to incubate everything at room temperature for 15 minutes and read it. If I still get nothing, then I'm going to incubate for 15 minutes at 4 degrees and read it. You should get some reaction after 15 minutes at 4 degrees to point you in the direction of what's going on.
So the incubation like at 30 minutes, like don't get sample.
I've never seen anything like this happen.
Okay.
Like it's not going to be common at all that you would get no reaction at all. You would probably see weak reactions if something was happening. If you got a really, really bad sample that was completely diluted with like saline when they drew the sample and you didn't have a lot of plasma in there, you might see weaker reactions in the reverse, but it shouldn't be, there's at no point that there's going to be no plasma in a tube. So this would be most likely human error. Something was not added. Okay, so now we have a gel. So this is a different, this is not ortho gel. This is Gripples, I believe. And they make different ABO cards. Some have reverse, some don't have reverse. Some have multiple D antisera, which we'll talk about RH a lot more in the next workshop. So what is the problem here? What does this look like? What? It has mixed field. It does. So when you see mixed field, yes, thank you. A3, we're thinking A3. And that's another thing that can be plus or minus. When you test A3 with anti-A, B, usually you get mixed field 2. So that would be a good thing to look at. So it would be good to think A3 if you did not see this AB. But since the AB is positive, what you would be thinking, and one thing you want to look at where the most cells are. So not very many negative cells. So what I would be thinking, because you don't have the reverse here, so that's not helping you. The reverse would tell you what's going on. But what I would think is this is an A person that was transfused 1 unit of O negative cells during a need for uncross match blood. So they came in a car accident or something and they gave them a unit of O negative. So mostly A cells of their own, but some O negative cells. Or O net positive, because you don't see any negative cells in your D. But yeah. Okay, here's a very poor picture. But you can still clearly see the reactions. So what's going on here? So one thing, is this an ABO discrepancy?
Negative,
Does the forward match the reverse?
yeah, it does.
They have the, you have this, right?
Yeah, so it's not an ABO discrepancy. Remember, D is not part of ABO. So no ABO discrepancy, but you do have a mixed population. So this, a negative person could have got transfused a positive cells or vice versa.
Okay.
So this is likely due to either they were transfused or it depends on what this anisera is. If this is a monoclonal anisera, then it's looking at one clone. Some D are D blends. So in your rack, if you look at your anti-D, some will say D blend, some will say monoclonal, some will say polyclonal. So we'll talk about this a lot more next week. I love the RH system, so I will talk about it all day if you ask me to. But the really confusing thing about D, when you're looking at an RBC, D is a multi-pass protein. So the D antigen will do like this across the cell membrane. So there are weak D phenotypes and there are partial D phenotypes. So this would be a D positive. And then if you have no D, you're D negative. So there are some phenotypes that are weak D, meaning they react weaker with anti-D. So weak D is a quantitative difference. You still have all of the D antigen, you just have less of it. So you react weaker. So because you have all of the D antigen, you will not make an anti-D. You have D. There's nothing to make an antibody to. Then there's partial D. So you may react 2+ only. You're missing epitopes of D. So if each piece of D that sticks out is an epitope, so we'll call this epitope 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we have a partial D that has 1, 4, and 9. They can make an anti-D because if they get transfused a regular D, they're not going to recognize 2, 3, 5, whatever, and they're going to make an antibody to those epitopes. So remember, go back to immunology. Antigens can have lots of epitopes. So the epitope is where the antibody will bind. So if you have a monoclonal anti-D, it could just be specific to epitope 3. So if you have one of the partial Ds, it's not going to detect a partial D. But if you have a blend of D, it's going to have anti-1, anti-3, and these are not real names. There are specific names for these anti. This is just for simplicity's sake. We're gonna talk about this more next week or next session. But partial Ds are qualitative. They can make anti-Ds. Weak Ds are quantitative. They cannot make anti-D. So anyway, if you saw a discrepancy like this, you would look at transfusion history. It's likely due to a transfusion.
And that reaction is like immediate, like you had the one question that they had the transfusion. Like
Well,
day
for the cells,
before.
the cells would be immediate because you have those donor cells floating around. If they're making an antibody to the donor cells, that's not going to be immediate. It's going to take some time for those
They would
antibodies.
Show up on a test that they had like the day before, had a transfusion.
But again, it depends on the size. If you have a big person that gets 1 unit, you might not see any mixed field. If you have a baby that gets a transfusion, it might be very obvious. So it depends on the size of the transfusion, the size of the person. And in a tube, it's going to be much harder to see. In gel, it's much more obvious when you have a mixed cell.
So do you always usually do both or?
It just depends on the facility. And this is our last one. And it's kind of hard to see because of the background. It's hard to take pictures of bills. So missing reaction or weak reaction. Or missing or extra. So forward reaction, super strong, looks like an AB positive. So again, this is an example, an AB positive where you have to have a control. Your control is telling you you're not having spontaneous agglutination in your cells. Your control must be negative if you have an AB positive person. If this control is positive too, we don't trust these reactions. Does that make sense? That means in your control, your cells are just agglutinating spontaneously. It's not because it's a true positive reaction with anti-B or anti-B. So you just have some extra reactions in your reverse typing, which this could be caused by an AB patient being transfused with O plasma. They're taking some of those, or they have some anti-A and anti-B in their system from that plasma that was transfused. Or this can also be caused, have you guys seen Rouleaux in your hematology courses? So Rouleaux will show in your reverse type, if the patient has multiple myeloma or Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, one of the diseases that makes you make a lot of plasma proteins, can make your cells really sticky. It makes your plasma sticky pretty much. So you can have extra reactions that's due to those plasma proteins, can cause problems in your reverse type. So this might be Rouleaux. If you suspected this was Rouleaux, you would switch to tube and view it in the microscope to see if you have the stack of coins appearance. If you see that, to prove that it's Rouleaux, you have to spin down your reaction, your reverse reaction again. And then before shaking it, you're going to pull the plasma off the cells and do a saline replacement. So if you pull up 2 drops of plasma, you're going to replace it with 2 drops of saline, mix it up, spin it again. If you read that reaction after the saline replacement, if it's a negative reaction, you have proven that it was Rouleaux causing the agglutination.
Can you explain how to fill this up?
Yes.
So if it's negative, that compared to below, whenever you, after you do the saline replacement, you do 2 drops of saline, 2 drops of saline along with 2 drops of serum, and if it's negative.
No, you don't add your so if you do your regular reverse with 2 drops of your plasma with the reagent cells, and you see Rouleaux, what you think is Rouleaux, then you're going to spin it down again. You're going to pull off the plasma. So when you spin it down, instead of shaking it back up to read it, spin it, pull off the plasma, leave the red cells there, add saline. So if it's a true antibody that's bound to the cells, when you pull off the plasma, the antibody is still going to be on the cells. When you pull off the plasma and add the saline, and then you see no reaction, you're proving that there's no antibodies bound to those cells. We can draw it out. So it makes sense. So this is how these are recorded. So phase, so you did an immediate spin. Your bottom row is your auto control. And then you chose LIS or PEG and read at AHG, and you record your reactions. So you should all have negative reactions for AHG. So you're just going to have 0, check, 0, check.
You know how many?
So the other thing, you will see other labs. This is a side conversation. I don't want to confuse you. You're asking how to fill this out. So you're going to have a row for immediate spin. You're going to have your AHG, and then you're going to document whatever you chose, LIS or PEG. You're going to just write that above. And then, for example, if you chose PEG, your 37-degree. You use PEG, the only thing you can record at 37 is hemolysis. So you would record no hemolysis, no hemolysis, no hemolysis. And then at PEG, you would document 0, 0, 0. And then for all 0 reactions, you must add check cells. So you would document check, 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 but you check to make sure they're all working. So you can record like that. That's how I prefer to record check cells, because it takes up less space. Some labs will add another row and just name it check cells. And then they'll actually record a reaction for check cells, like 1+, 1+, 1+. I don't like that. It just takes up extra space, and you don't really need to know what reaction it is. That's why I prefer just to do those. Yes, I checked, and everything's good. But both of these is something you might see. Both acceptable ways to document check cells. Okay, so Rouleaux. So what is happening? This is your reagent A1 cell. And in Rouleaux, you have plasma that has a lot of proteins in it. It's extra proteins that are causing Rouleaux, which is basically sticky proteins making the RBC stick together. It's a problem because it makes you think there's agglutination when there really isn't. It's just stickiness. So you're adding your patient plasma, and this is the Rouleaux stickiness. And then as a side, this would be reagent A1 RBC. So when I'm showing something, I like to show you like what's going on in one thing and what's going on in the other thing, so you know the difference in what's happening. So this would be in like a multiple myeloma patient that has extra proteins causing Rouleaux. And I cannot spell Rouleaux off the top of my head. I'm so sorry. There's too many vowels. As opposed to a B patient that actually has anti-A. So in this one, you're actually gonna have, because anti-A is a anti or a IgM, which is a pentamer. So it's gonna make all your cells really stick together. So if you see some agglutination, what you're gonna do, spin your cells back down. So if you have true antibodies, whenever you spin down and take off the plasma, you are removing all these, all the sticky plasma. They won't stay stuck to the cell because it's just sticky. If you have a true IgM, they are bound to the A1. So after you remove the plasma, and then you add back saline, all the stickiness has been removed. So you're just going to get a clean negative reaction. Your RBC is clean. If you have a true anti-A, these are not going to leave if you take away the plasma. You can take away extra IgM, but they're still going to be bound. So you're still going to have a positive reaction. If it's a true antibody, you're going to have a negative reaction if it's the protein caused by Rouleaux, or Rouleaux caused by the protein. You look so confused.
I have to read about it because isn't it something to do with you do the list for the zeta potential, and that zeta potential is what prevents, like, there's a bunch of negative charges around that cell, and if you're putting in the list, that's going to.
So that's different,
Oh,
because in the ABO, you're not using anything like that. That is the function of list, low ionic saline. But in Rouleaux, it's just the plasma that you're removing for the saline replacement.
and because it's not actually bound. So what about why not do an illusion? Like to look and see like what's underneath.
Because it's a 20-second immediate spin.
Oh,
An elution is like an hour-long process. So you want to make things as simple as possible. An elution costs money too, because it's a kit. No reason to do an elution. Because there's nothing sticking to it. If you did an elution on this, there'd be nothing there. Because there's no antibody present. An elution is just going to elute off antibodies.
Yeah, anything. On the cell. Okay. But then that would be obvious in a question because everything would be positive. Like
All your plasma reactions would be positive. So that's why we do a positive and auto control too. Because yeah, the auto control should be positive too if it's Rouleaux causing the reactions. So your A cells, your B cells, and your auto control should all be showing Rouleaux. Because it's the plasma, it's not the cells. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make a difference what cell you're adding, because you're going to see it on your screen cells too. Any tube that has your patient plasma in it is going to show them.
it won't be just like one showing another one.
No, and that's another thing. When you have unspecific reactions, you're thinking it's an unspecific protein or something causing it. Because if it's reacting with all cells equally, it's not a reaction to an actual antigen. So it's not an antibody reaction. It's a non-specific protein reaction.
That was good. Are you gonna post this lecture?
Yes, and this is a extremely long. Yeah,
That's super helpful. What you're doing with the drawing.